today just for a moment. And so before I invite Ilona and Ellayne to come and speak to us, I'd just like to read this very insightful contribution by David Anderson, who is a historian from Williamstown. So I thought that was very appropriate, and he has helped immensely with this event. So David writes, "The great evil idea of the 20th century is that we must exclude or suppress another language, religion, or even the culture of an entire people in order to perfect ourselves. During the war, our own country of Canada was far from alone in allowing such views to retard her immigration policy. The importance of the Kaplan family story is that a traditional and historic Ontario village of 350 people responded person by person and day by day in a decent and kindly manner when a family of Lithuanian Jews takes up farming in their midst. Able to see others as we see ourselves, and to feel within others as we feel within ourselves, the world is made better, and we are the better for it. Just as bigotry is the first cousin of ignorance, enlightenment is the great redeemer. Today, our history is burnished by this family who escaped the Shoah in Europe to thrive among us in respect and decency. Visitors who chance upon the village of Williamstown in time become wide-eyed with surprise at our many links to the builders of our nation. It is then, as now, that we say, small village, big story." Thank you, David. So now I would like to introduce Ilona Weinstein and Ellayne Kaplan, and she's going to share their story with us. And while that's going on, Neil is going to project some images on the screen so that it will provide you with a little bit of a link to some of the people and the places that Ilona and Ellayne will speak about. So welcome. If I've got that too loud.
I'm going to try and do this standing. What is that?
Okay,
that's how I think it is. I think that's great. I just would like to begin by thanking the Cornwall Interfaith Partnership for including us here tonight. I say this on behalf of my entire family, but especially two of my first cousins, Ilona and Nomi. The story we're going to tell you is very dramatic, but it's a beautiful story and it has a happy ending. We'd be more than happy to meet with you later to talk about more details, and I'll begin. This is the story of a Jewish family from Lithuania, three righteous men who facilitated their deliverance, and Williamstown, the small Ontario town which was their shelter from the storm of the Holocaust. Sussman Kaplan and his wife Hinda lived with 4 of their 6 children, Natan, Berta, Fanny, and Ida, in the port city of Memel, Lithuania. Life was good. Memel, now Klaipėda, had originally been part of Germany, but was detached from it at the end of World War I. As Nazi power grew in the 1930s, Hitler pressed for the return of Memel and supported pro-German activists in the region. In the 1938 election there, pro-German parties won 25 out of 27 seats in the local parliament. A few months later, German military forces occupied the port city on March 21st, 1939. The Kaplans had expected this, but they were still in shock when they received the phone call, a voice simply saying, "Auf Wiedersehen." This was the signal the time had come to leave. Leaving that very day, they followed their plan to flee to the interior of the country, to a city called Kaunas or Kovna, where their 2 eldest children, already married, lived with their families. They had only a few hours to pack. There was, of course, complete pandemonium, and Ida, who was Ilona's mother, would tell stories about how she selected a new coat to take with her, but leaving behind all of her photographs. Natan, my dad, who was an artist, described the elaborate preparations that had been made to transport silver, crystal, and china, and the complete lack of planning to pack his negatives, photos, drawings, and paintings. They did not wait to see Hitler, who arrived the next day to inspect the city. One of the people who came to say goodbye at the train was a young German fellow whom Ida knew. She described the encounter. He said to me, "You know, you are very lucky to be Jewish, because if you leave Europe, wherever you go to a Jewish organization and they will help you. But I, as a German, nobody would believe that I'm a socialist, that I'm against the Hitler Party. They would all suspect I'm a Nazi." I thought that very, very sad, very sad.
It's easier to stand, that way we can see the... That has to happen. So, after a long, very crowded train trip, the family arrived in Kovno and stayed with their eldest daughter, Nadia, and her family. Moses, their son, lived nearby with his family and small son. Sussman Kaplan knew that the next challenge was to leave the country. Through the grapevine, they had heard of a CPR agent from Canada named Mark Sorensen, Ben's father, who, on behalf of the Canadian government, was searching for farmers to immigrate to Canada, to work farms that had been abandoned during the Depression. Sorensen had the authority to facilitate visas. Although he was aware that Jews were not welcome, he handed out visas anyway to anyone who could prove they had farming experience. He did not ask about their religion. Our grandfather was able to show that he had farming experience. Before settling in Mamel, where he owned a successful heating oil import business, he had owned an estate with tenant farmers. The estate encompassed large tracts of land where the Lithuanian president was sometimes invited to join in the hunt. Nathan remembered learning the rudiments of veterinary care from the local doctor and had participated in birthing calves. Without realizing it, Mark Sorensen was among the angels guiding the family to safety at a time when Canada was not welcoming Jewish immigrants, a situation that has been described in detail in the book None is Too Many by Irving Abella and Harold Troper. And so, Sussman, Hinda, and their 4 unmarried children boarded the SS Montclair and arrived in Montreal during a heat wave on July 29, 1939, just a few weeks before the invasion of Poland and the official beginning of World War II.
Sussman and Nathan spent all their time searching for an affordable farm. By October, they had found the farm in Williamstown. The house was very old and very small. The hearth dated back to the 18th century. There was a water pump in the yard, no indoor plumbing, an outhouse, a barn, a woodshed, an ice house, a chicken coop, and a root cellar. In Fanny's words, "The impression was horrible on the first day. We waited outside because Nathan had to fumigate the farmhouse so we could go in and sleep. And then it got livelier. People came from Cornwall, Jewish people. We only had to make coffee. They brought chocolate and cigarettes. It was never boring. French people brought us baskets of vegetables and fruit. Someone brought a plow. We were the only immigrants they had ever seen or heard. One young boy came with his sister. They wanted to know more about Europe. He went as a soldier to Europe. He never came back. We had a carpenter whose son worked on our farm. He went to Europe. He never came back. Then we had a teacher. She was teaching us English for free. She came in the winter after school on snowshoes. After the hatred in Europe, where they were spitting on my mother's feet, and they wouldn't sit at the same table with us. You know, you get such an inferiority complex, and coming here and getting all the love from the farmers and the Jewish people, that was something we didn't expect. The two remaining children and their families were desperate to get out of Lithuania. It would not happen until they heard of the Japanese diplomat, Chiune Sugihara, who was signing entry visas to Japan for Jews in Lithuania, an action he took in defiance of instructions from his Japanese superiors, and which was based entirely on humanitarian grounds. The story is told that he signed the visas until his wrist ached, and then his wife would support his hands so that he could keep on signing. Sugihara issued these visas in collaboration with Jan Spartendijk, acting Dutch consul in Lithuania, allowing these Jews to leave Lithuania and travel to Japan in transit to Curacao in the Dutch West Indies. Moses, the elder Kaplan's son, got a visa, so did Nadia, the eldest daughter, along with their spouses and children. They made the harrowing trip across Russia to catch a boat to Japan, a story that Nadia's grandson William has graphically recounted in his book, One More Border. Meanwhile, how to obtain permission for these two families to enter Canada? There is the legendary story of our Zeta, our grandfather, our Opa, getting a lift to Ottawa in a cheese truck. His mission was to meet the Minister of Immigration, Frederick Blair, to acquire entry visas to Canada for his son and daughter and their families, who had left Lithuania, crossed Russia, and were now stranded in Kobe, Japan. Blair was known to oppose and limit Jewish immigration, but after a meeting, Zeta emerged with the assurance that the visas would be granted. Blair said something like, "Canada can use Jews like you." Finally, in the fall of 1940, the families arrived. They had to travel around the world to finally be reunited with the Kaplans on the farm in Williamstown.
Everyone lived crowded together in a 3-bedroom house. Sussman, Hinda, Nathan, Bertha, Fanny, Ida, and now Nadia and Bernd had arrived with their children, Nomi and Igor. Moses, Sonia, and their son, Atid, came a few months afterwards. There was no regret. They were all safe, and they were together. Farm labor wasn't easy. Sussman, now well into his 60s, did the heavier work with Nathan, who was in his 30s, and with the occasional help of day laborers. The daughters milked the cows, tended the vegetable garden, and did housework. Though many types of farming were tried, nothing ever really succeeded particularly well, and money was tight. Selling eggs to the Steinberg's grocery chain in Montreal brought some stability, but it was clear that their future was not going to be in agriculture. The 3 grandchildren went to the 2-room Williamstown school, the one that's now a museum. They, at first, did not understand a word that the teacher said, being familiar only with German and Yiddish. However, they quickly picked up English, as children do, and almost immediately changed their names. Igor became Ike, probably after Eisenhower. Atid became Art, and Nomi became Naomi. They would walk a mile each way to school. Nomi tells the story one day at school when the children heard an unfamiliar sound of an airplane, and the teacher allowed them to go to the window and see it in the sky. On weekends, visitors would come from far and near. The Kaplans were one of the first refugee families and were of great interest to the Jewish community of Cornwall, as well as Montreal. The mayor of Cornwall, who was mentioned before, Aaron Horowitz, once took Nathan and Bertha to a hockey game in Montreal. Probably the first and last game they ever went to. However, their children more than made up for it. One visitor came from nearby. His name was Paul Sala, also an immigrant of Jewish background, who had settled on a farm in nearby Rivière-Baudette. On his first visit, he stopped a young woman to ask directions to the Kaplan farm. It was Ida. A romance developed, and in October 1941, they were married in the synagogue in Cornwall, here probably down the road somewhere. And they were my parents. In the next years, Bertha, Fanny, and Nathan also married. Nathan married Etta, Ellayne's parents. Etta was also from Lithuania and had survived 3 years in the Kovno ghetto and 1 year in the Stutthof concentration camp and lost her entire family. During the first weeks after the Kaplan family arrival, both the local priest and the minister preached to their congregations that the Kaplans were to be treated with kindness and that the merchants were to extend credit to them as long as it was necessary. One of the religious leaders invited the family to his church, understanding that the synagogue in Cornwall was far away, and suggesting that they come to the local church to pray to the Jewish God. Nathan was astounded at this kind and heartfelt gesture. It would have been unimaginable at that time in Europe. Nomi talks about the long winter months. She would play gin rummy with our grandmother, Oma. She says, we used to sit and drink coffee with milk and sugar cubes while we played. I thought all 7-year-old children played cards and drank coffee with their grandmothers. She also loved reading. There were plenty of books, and as she said, as soon as I could read, I was allowed any book I liked. One of the first books was written in German. It was a novel, Nana, by Emil Zola, the story of a courtesan. I didn't really understand it, but I liked it. Remember that, Nomi?
I can hardly hear you.
Okay.
By the
I'm doing my best, but I can hardly hear you.
We'll talk louder.
By the 1950s, everyone had moved to Montreal. The old farm was sold. Sussman and Hinda were relocated in Montreal with 4 of their children and their families within walking distance, Ida and Paul and daughters in Rivière-Baudette, and Nadia and her family in Windsor. Though it was probably for the best that the family left the farm, their affection for the house, the land, and the community never waned. The entire experience gradually became a kind of mythology for our family, one which has had a profound impact on all of us, even in Sussman and Hinda's great-grandchildren. These are Bertha's words. You have to know Memo. It wasn't a big city. Everybody knew everybody. We took everything very lightly. Even just before we left to go to Canada, we used to go to nightclubs and dance and have wonderful times. Our lifestyle didn't change till we came to Canada. And I think Canada did a world of good for the whole family, because then we faced reality. And that's why we could go through so many things later in our lives, sicknesses and everything, because of the good days we had. And here the farm was a big help for our mental state, for coming to terms with yourself. This was a big deal.
The last words are from Nomi in Vancouver. This was her suggestion a while ago. She asked, would it be possible to add the numbers of grandchildren and great-grandchildren so that the heroic deeds would be emphasized? And so here they are. There were 9 grandchildren. Igor, Nomi, Atid, all born in Lithuania. Ilona, Renee, Ellayne, Ruth, Bert, Stephen, born in Canada. There are 16 great-grandchildren. William, Michael, Eric, Amy, Daniel, Lida, Jennifer, Ellen, Nathan, Rachel, Joseph, David, Jesse, Sarah, Paul, and Karen. And also 12 great-great-grandchildren. Matthew, Ariel, Max, Simon, Hannah, Sarah, Holly, Ezra, Aiden, Sophia, Anna, and last but not least, Safi. 37 descendants so far.
Thank you very much.